Well, my name is Mary Smith McCulloch. I'm a Professor Emerita from University of British Columbia, Okanagan. But I go back a long way in the Okanagan, and I emigrated from Scotland in 1967. My husband and I came to Canada, but for the first several years we spent most of the time between Manitoba and Saskatchewan, arriving in Kelowna in 1970. I was educated at the Glasgow School of Art, specialising in printmaking. So I arrived in Kelowna, and there was a fine arts program being set up at Okanagan College. And I happened one night to be listening to late local news, and they mentioned the fact that there was a fine arts program, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. So I phoned the next day, and the then dean said, oh, could you come down to meet me? And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I packed up a lot of artwork, put it in a big portfolio. I had no idea what I was going to. And bear in mind, he had nothing to do with fine arts. He was a dean for a large area of the college. And I went in and I explained who I was, and he said, but you are the kind of person we're looking for, because we're setting up a program. There's 1 year completed. We want a second year to start, where there would be a printmaking program. And he said, would you be interested on a consultative basis, taking that on to look at implementing it? Well, of course I said yes. So that was the start. That was 1973. Then I started teaching in the program. There was 3 of us, Jerry Garneau, Toru Fujibayashi, and myself. And then they hired another lady to teach, I think it was ceramic sculpture, but it was on a very part-time basis, everything at that point. They were just trying to put the program together. Now, as we know, it is now part of the UBC campus, and is now part of the Department of Creative and Critical Studies. So it's been really interesting for me to watch this development from 1972 to 2023, and I think that's over 50 years. I have an intaglio-based practice, and I use my etching press very much as a tool for developing prints. Some of the works are very much on the plate, like an etching, where you can make changes when you're printing it, about how much ink you wipe off, or if you're doing an edition and you want them all the same. It's very rigorous in what you would do in that case, but I like to play with the press and make things work. So I not only use the intaglio-based process, but I also use monoprint as well. And the monoprints that I've recently been working on, or recent being 25 years I suppose, that I use a big sheet of plexiglass where I place a drawing or a collage underneath the plexiglass, and that becomes the image that I'm going to develop the work from. I may make changes along the way where I'll lift it up and add and delete, but I use is very similar to a silk screening process in some ways, because each colour is a drawing and I layer one over the top of the other. And it's quite an involved process. I use makeup applicators, Q-tips, everything under the sun to draw on this plexi to create these monoprints. And I want in these monoprints to create a real feeling of almost like the time has stopped, and a moment in time, taking us back through the centuries or into the future. So that's my monoprints. With the etchings, in the early 80s, I worked on quite a series of orchard prints in the Okanagan, because I love to travel, and I affectionately call a series I work on my civilization series, and that's my interest in history in the various countries in Italy, Portugal, etc., including, of course, Great Britain. And I like to go to geological sites, archaeological sites, sometimes it's World Heritage Sites, and the reason they've been chosen to be a World Heritage Site. And in one of, or two of the prints in this present exhibit are about my visit to Evora, which is a World Heritage City. And the reason I went there was because it had a climate very, very similar to the Okanagan, had vineyards, but also had a Roman temple in the middle. So it kind of gave me a great feeling of this embodied everything I love to look at. So also, when I'm working on that civilization series, I like to take us from maybe before Christ was born back through to maybe the 9th century up to the present time. So I work in a collage-based situation there where I move images around back and forth. I also like to work where I live, the place I reside, the Okanagan, and that's why in the early 80s I spent a lot of time in the Glenmore area drawing trees and looking at the formations of the trees, and I was particularly intrigued by the fact that there was such drama in the V shapes. And I deliberately removed any of the landscape and just left the trees and made sure that we got that archetypal structure. And that became quite significant, a whole series of works that I worked on. Prior to that, I was working on a series of the Kettle Valley, and the reason I sought out the Kettle Valley was because of the wonderful big trestles connecting valleys. I loved that. But why I was drawn to it was the fact that before I left Scotland, I was working on a series of prints which were called the Forth and Clyde Canal and the Crinan Canal. And I was born in this little village, and it's a peninsula, and right at the top of the peninsula was a canal connecting Ardrishick to a little place called Crinan. And I used to, as a little girl, go on the boats, take my bike, and go on the boat all the way up through the canal, and then bike back down the towpath. And I used to think it was a wonderful big sculpture in the land where you went into the canal, you come up, raise it, and then up to another level. And the big lock gates were big wooden structures. So when I got to Glasgow, I sought out the Forth and Clyde Canal, which connected Glasgow and Edinburgh in the industrial age. It was in total disuse. When I, as a student, went and worked, did all kinds of drawings there, and did a whole series of drawings and did etching aqueducts all about the Forth and Clyde Canal. So when I arrived in Kelowna, that's why I sought out the Kettle Valley. So I did a lot of work on that, and that then moved on to, so the Okanagan has always been a significant part of the work that I work on, and I love to work on the two series at the same time. So I'll roll up a colour in my studio, and I'll move to the Okanagan and then move back with the same colour on another plate, which has nothing to do with the Okanagan. So I connect them. The work for this exhibit took a bit of a change because we all knew what happened with the pandemic, and I, like everybody else, was wow, we can't move, we can't go anywhere. So I went into my studio, and prior to that I had gone back to doing what I called mini McCullochs. I was cutting up tiny little plates and really enjoying taking drawings from the past and playing around with smaller works. And I was just having lots of fun with those little plates. And actually they're in the exhibit. And that was just prior to the pandemic. And so I can't carry on with this. And I had a lot of little plates looking at me. So I went out into the garden and got bits of wood, bits of tree. I just picked up a lot of stuff. I went into my knitting bag and got a whole lot of wool. And I went out to the studio and I rolled up on these little plates a soft ground, which is that you can use for etching. It never gets hard. So when you put something in it and you roll it through the press, that, like a feather or a leaf, goes right into it. You lift it off and you etch it. So I did that with these little plates. So they all came back looking at me total chaos. So I thought, ooh, what do I do now? So I left them like that for probably 2 or 3 weeks and went back and said, right, look at this, what are you going to do? Take us out of the chaos. So what I did was, I took a little piece of rope and I put it on the print. It's the one that's on the invitation. Put it down, and then I put a hard ground on it, which made it hard, took my etching needle and drew a little tree, off kilter a bit. And I thought, right, we're bringing sense back in here. I'm not sure where we were going, because it was right when you couldn't literally go anywhere. And that was the start of the series. I then thought a lot more about what I was doing, and I thought, right, at that time I've always been interested in the Book of Kells, which is in Dublin, but the island of Iona, which is the birthplace of Celtic Christianity in Britain, I visit that a lot. It's a beautiful island. And that's where they're pretty sure in the 8th and 9th century, that was where the Celtic monks actually did all of the illustrations for the Book of Kells. And I used to love and go and sit in the abbey and sit where these monks were actually doing this work and look out and gosh, nothing's changed really. The sea is beautifully blue and well, not always in Iona, but the days, I like to think of those days. And because you get a lot of storms as well. And to the south of that, there's a big whirlpool called the Corribrechen. And I love the idea of the tides and the swirling in the water. And I thought, I'm going to do work where I do the border on the plate. And I'm going to do a series of works that reference the Book of Kells, the meditative quality of the Book of Kells. And I brought the Okanagan tree back in, and I developed its roots, taking us right down. And then 2 of them, there's almost like the gravestones are on the ground, and the shape of the gravestone is in 2 of them. And that's how I did that series. The other series, which are 6 by 6 small plates, I decided that I was going to take us into the whole idea that the trees, we will survive. I'm desperate to survive, thinking of climate change, the Ukrainian war, everything was going on. And what I did was I worked with the idea that was the eye of the hurricane, or we were right down inside a whirlpool. But we were going to survive. And so that whole series of the tree, you'll see the Okanagan tree in those. I then moved, as we moved through the pandemic, I thought I have to think more about how we have to think about this planet. So I went back to drawings that I'd done in the Belgo, the KLO, and the Glenmore area, because as my sense of place of where I live has always been important. So these trees no longer exist because it's all townhouses in Glenmore, as we know, many rooftops instead of many trees. So I took those trees and I've put them in what I consider, one is the Ice Age, the other one is, I'm thinking of air, and the other one, I'm just thinking of it swirling around in the air. The other one is as going down into the depths of the ocean. So that's the 3 earth meditation ones. I then moved to the sky and the sky meditation. So I again did a different background, and these are a combination of etching, monoprint and sheen collé. And so what I did was all the drawings that I did in very, very soft rice paper with a lithocrane. So technically it's not actually a print, it's a lithocrane drawing, almost emulating a litho. So, and I took the roots and I drew them so that they spread right out and went down. And it was at that point I was wondering what I would really call this series. And of course, I'm very kind of down to earth, and I actually said, maybe I should call it COVID-20, whatever year we were in, and I realized that was perfectly silly because it was addressing climate change and everything else. So I was in a quandary as to what I would really call this, and then definitely it'll just be entitled. And when my daughter said to me, do you know what? I think of a really good title of what you're working on is As Above and So Below. And of course it's a very old saying. That was it. I said, perfect. So that was how I continued with that series. Well, what I want is for people to leave this exhibit with a sense of hope and survival. And of course, as we know, as we speak right now, we've just gone through a week where I've been evacuated. I'm now in evacuation alert. I've watched the fires across the lake. And I had no idea that this, obviously, it's been happening in other places too, all over the world, in Hawaii and in Greece and everywhere else, but it was very much on our doorstep last week. And I think I gave myself a bit of a fright but the very final print I did for this exhibit was based on, again, As Above, So Below. And maybe could I just show I'll just show you, this is a detail of one of the prints. And this particular tree here is the hawthorn tree, which near my village in Scotland is really good luck for the future if you place a coin in it. It's not very nice to the tree, but that's what you do. And I've always loved it because it's stacked with all those coins. And it goes back to pagan times, obviously. And you can't see it here because it's a detail, but I also have the remnants of a column that because of the earthquake in Portugal, things got, in the 18th century, the things got moved up and down. I was fascinated with what happened to ancient sites, and that was the remnant. This one here, that I was given a rock from the Okanagan and the other side of the lake with the fossil embedded in it of the pine trees. Millions of years old. I thought, wonderful. So I actually took the rock and I rolled up ink over it and got the image. I then embedded that in the print, not the rock, but the drawing I did from it. And this, I walk my dogs every day, and I look at the sun and the sunset, and this is a sunset near my village. So I connected. In my mind, I connect all parts, but really, it's not about my story. It's about the fact that it's about our survival, and the idea of the lake colour. I can't believe I actually did that, but I had in mind the fact that the fires are continuing. I wasn't in the Okanagan at that point, it was in Karameas, I believe, or no, maybe not yet, but worried about the fire. And this here is the remnants of the fire, and it was the final print, and we just went through a big fire. So what I want people to take away is that we must look after our planet.